It was a chilly Saturday afternoon when I made the decision that would change everything. My hands still held the keys to the house I had worked my entire life for. The warm weight of them in my palms seemed to be the only thing left that connected me to the life I'd once known. As I pushed through the front door, the familiar scent of my house hit me. There was something about it, the smell of old leather chairs, warm wood, and the lingering traces of the dinners I had made over the years. But today, it felt different. It felt cold. Inside, I saw my son-in-law, Ethan, stretched out on the couch, wearing the smug expression that had become so common around here. He was holding a beer in his hand, eyes glued to the TV, and didn't even look up as I walked in. He had become accustomed to my presence, silent, invisible, and I had let it go on for too long. "Can you grab me a beer, too?" he asked without breaking his gaze from the screen. I felt a pang in my chest, the same feeling I had every time I tried to do something, only to be dismissed. I had bought that beer for him. My Social Security check had paid for it, for everything here. The milk in the fridge, the bread, the utilities. All of it was on my shoulders. Yet he acted like it was his right to be here, in my house, living off my sacrifices. "Excuse me?" I asked, setting the grocery bags down on the table. The plastic handles bit into my palms. "Yeah, you heard me," he muttered, finally looking up but not really seeing me. His tone was dismissive, the kind that said he thought I was just an old man, someone who could be pushed around. "I just walked in," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I need to put these groceries away." His eyes didn't move from the screen. "Yeah, well, do it later. Grab the beer first." I could feel my chest tightening, the frustration that had built up over the years threatening to spill over. I took a deep breath, but the anger was already rising. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I had built this life for my daughter, put every ounce of myself into ensuring she had everything she needed. And this was how I was treated? I stared at him, seeing the entitlement in his posture, the way he rested there as if I owed him something. "This is my house," I said, my voice steady but carrying more weight than I expected. "Not yours. I've done enough." His face twisted into a sneer. "Your house? Funny, because your daughter and I live here now. We pay the bills with my money." I didn't say anything. What could I say? I had given up my retirement savings, my pension, to support them. I had paid for their college, for their wedding, for the mortgage. And this was how they repaid me, by treating me like a servant. Tiffany walked into the room, her blonde hair tied up in a messy ponytail, a dish towel in her hands. She glanced between us, her expression one of mild irritation. "What's going on here?" she asked, not even bothering to look at me directly. "Your father's being difficult," Ethan said, his voice dripping with that same condescending tone. "I asked him to get me a beer, and he's making a big deal out of it." I saw the flicker of disappointment in Tiffany's eyes, but it was nothing new. Over the years, I had become just another obstacle to her perfect life with Ethan. The little girl who used to run to me with arms open wide was now the one asking me to obey her husband. "Please, Dad, just get him the beer," she said, stepping closer to Ethan's side. "It's not worth fighting over." I felt my heart drop, the final blow. The ultimatum had come, clear as day. It was either him, or me. I had been given this choice more times than I could count, always with the expectation that I would fold. But not today. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll pack." The room went silent. I could hear Tiffany's breath catch, and I didn't look back. I just walked down the hall, my footsteps measured, steady. Ethan let out a sharp breath behind me, and I heard the faint sound of Tiffany whispering, "Dad, wait." But I didn't wait. I reached my bedroom, grabbed my suitcase, and began packing. Just a few essentials, clothes, a photo of Martha wrapped carefully in tissue paper, my medications. Nothing else. It felt strangely calm, as if the weight I had carried for so long had been lifted from my shoulders. I didn't look back as I left, not even once. I drove off into the night, away from the house I had built, away from the family I had given everything to. I wasn't sure what was next, But I knew one thing: the game had changed. I would never let them use me again. I drove for miles, the headlights of my old Buick cutting through the darkness, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. My hands, gripped firmly on the steering wheel, ached with the weight of what I had just done. But it wasn't regret that I felt, it was clarity. I had reached the point where my sacrifices no longer meant anything. They had become nothing more than a leash, a tool for manipulation. I had given them everything, but it had never been enough for Tiffany and Ethan. Now, they would have to face the consequences of their own actions. I had no place to go, no home to return to. The house that I had worked my entire life for, the place that had been filled with memories of my late wife, was no longer mine. It was theirs now, and I was the one who had been discarded. As I pulled into the small motel parking lot on the outskirts of town, I felt a strange sense of relief. The motel was quiet, almost eerily so. I was alone, with no one to answer to, no expectations, no demands. The room was small, the furniture old and worn, but it was mine for the moment. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, my mind still spinning. The events of the last few hours had been a blur, but now that I had time to think, I could see everything clearly. They had pushed me to the edge, and now they would have to deal with the fallout. I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through my contacts. I wasn't sure why I did it, but I felt an odd sense of responsibility to inform a few people of what had happened. People who might be able to help, or at least offer advice. I opened a text message to my old friend, Jack. Jack, I'm not sure how to say this, but things have taken a turn. I left Tiffany and Ethan's house today. They gave me an ultimatum, and I chose to walk. I'm not sure what comes next, but I need some time to figure it out. I stared at the message for a moment before hitting send. There was no turning back now. They had crossed a line, and I had responded in kind. There was no more running, no more pretending. It was time to face the consequences, for all of us. As I put the phone down, I noticed the photo of Martha that I had packed carefully into my suitcase. Her smiling face seemed to look at me with a quiet sadness, as though she had known this day was coming. I could almost hear her voice in my mind, telling me that I had done the right thing, that it was time for me to stop being their doormat. But even with the clarity, the loneliness was still there. It seeped into the corners of the room, wrapping itself around me like a heavy cloak. I missed her. I missed the life we had built together, the plans we had made for the future. But that future was no longer mine to hold. It had been taken from me by my own flesh and blood. The next morning, I woke early, the sunlight filtering in through the thin motel curtains. I had barely slept, but I was awake now, ready to face the day. The room felt stifling, as if the air itself was thick with the weight of my decisions. But it was better than the suffocating silence of their house, where every corner seemed to echo with the sound of their expectations. I grabbed a cup of coffee from the motel's small lobby and sat outside on the bench by the parking lot. It was a cold morning, but the chill in the air was a relief. I didn't want warmth, not yet. I wasn't ready to feel comfortable again. I pulled out my phone once more, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Bob Harrison. He had been a long-time colleague at the bank, and despite our years of separation, I still trusted him. Bob, I'm in a bit of a situation. Can we talk? I hit send, then stared at the screen for a moment before slipping the phone into my pocket. The uncertainty of what was to come lingered in the pit of my stomach, but I was no longer afraid. The time for fear had passed. Now, it was time to take control. As I sat there, I thought back to the years I had spent providing for my daughter and her family. The sacrifices I had made, the choices I had foregone, all of it was for nothing. And yet, here I was, starting over in a way I never expected, but with a newfound sense of strength. I was done being their puppet. Done being the one they could manipulate when it suited them. Now, it was time to rebuild, not just my life, but my dignity. And I would do it alone, if necessary. But as I waited for Bob's reply, I couldn't help but wonder, would Tiffany come to realize the gravity of what she had done? Would she ever see beyond her husband's manipulation to understand the truth of what I had sacrificed for her? It was late morning when Bob finally called. I had been pacing the small motel room for the better part of an hour, my mind still churning over everything. The weight of the past few days hung heavy on my shoulders, but the clarity that came with the decision to leave was starting to sink in. It had been the right choice, even though it felt like the hardest thing I had ever done. "Clark?" Bob's voice came through the phone, deep and familiar. "You doing all right?" "I'm surviving," I replied. "But I need your help." "Of course, anything you need. What's going on?" I took a breath before speaking. "It's about Tiffany and Ethan. I don't know how much you've heard, but things have gone south. They've been using me, Bob. And I've finally had enough." There was a brief silence on the other end. I could almost picture Bob sitting back in his chair, absorbing what I had said. "What's the situation? How can I help?" His voice had turned serious, ready for whatever I was about to share. I ran through the details. I told him about the ultimatum Tiffany had given me. How Ethan had dismissed me, how they had manipulated me financially over the years, expecting me to sacrifice everything, while they lived their lives without concern for the toll it was taking on me. "I've been paying their bills for years, Bob. College tuition, their wedding, mortgage payments, everything. And now they're treating me like I'm nothing. Like I'm a burden." Bob let out a heavy sigh. "I don't know how much you've been hiding from me all this time, Clark, but I can see how deep this runs. They really pushed you into a corner." "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. "And I'm not going to sit around and let them walk all over me anymore. I've been thinking, Bob. It's time to take control back. Time to make sure they understand that I won't be manipulated anymore. You've already made the big step by leaving. What's next?" I leaned against the motel wall, taking a deep breath. "I'm going to make sure they know I'm not a pawn anymore. I'm going to take every step necessary to protect myself. I've already started pulling back my financial support. I'm closing accounts, canceling payments, and I'm going to make sure they can't use me anymore. But I need someone in my corner." There was another pause, but this time Bob's tone had softened. "You know you have me, Clark. You've got a good case, too. They've been taking advantage of your generosity for far too long. Whatever you need, I can help." I felt a weight lift off my chest. At least Bob had my back. He wasn't just another person in my life who had been feeding off me. He had always been a good man, and his support meant more than I could explain. "I'm going to need you to help me with some paperwork, Bob. I need to make sure everything is documented, what I've paid for, the gifts I've given, everything. I'm also going to need you to look into some legal options. If they keep pushing, I want to know what my rights are. And if they try anything else, I'll need you to help me get the proper paperwork in place." "I'll get on it," he said immediately. "You won't have to worry about a thing." "Thanks, Bob," I said, feeling the first bit of calm in days. "I mean it. This is the last straw. I'm not going to let them destroy everything I've worked for. Not anymore. You've done the right thing, Clark. Let me take care of the rest. You just focus on yourself." The conversation ended, and I sat in the silence of the room for a few moments. For the first time, I didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt. There was only resolve. The next step was clear. I had to take control of my life again. It wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't sure where it would lead, but it was the only choice I had. I had spent too many years giving, and in the end, I had received nothing but disrespect and betrayal. Now it was time for me to live for myself. The phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Tiffany. "Dad, we need to talk. Please." I stared at the screen for a few moments, unsure of how to respond. The old me, the one who would drop everything to take her call, would have picked up immediately. But the new me, this man who had decided to stop being a doormat, simply put the phone down. She would have to wait. The world had changed, and so had I. It had been a few days since I spoke to Bob, and already, things were beginning to take shape. The clarity I had felt on the day I left Tiffany and Ethan's house was still with me, but now it was beginning to feel like something more. It wasn't just about leaving anymore. It was about making sure that they would never be able to take advantage of me again. The phone buzzed again, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Tiffany again. She had been texting me for the past few days, trying to get me to answer her calls, but I hadn't responded. I wasn't ready to talk to her, not yet. Not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The text was simple, but it still hit me hard. Dad, we need to talk. I'm sorry. I sat there for a moment, the words ringing in my ears. I wasn't sure what I expected. For a brief moment, I thought about picking up the phone and hearing her out, but then I remembered all the times I had listened to her excuses, all the times I had forgiven her, only to have the same thing happen again. I wasn't falling for it this time. I had given her everything. I had worked myself into the ground to provide for her and Ethan, even after they were both well into adulthood. I had paid their bills, covered their debts, sacrificed my own comfort for theirs. And this was how I was repaid. I wasn't about to let her manipulate me into feeling guilty again. I looked out the small window of the motel room, watching the sun dip low over the horizon. It was peaceful here, far away from the chaos of my old life. The air was still, and the only sounds were the distant calls of birds and the hum of traffic down the road. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. I sat back down on the bed, opened my laptop, and began reviewing the financial documents Bob had asked me to gather. It wasn't a pleasant task, but it was necessary. I needed to make sure everything was in order, every receipt, every bank statement, every wire transfer. I couldn't afford to leave anything out. As I worked, I thought about my next steps. Bob had already started looking into the legal side of things. If Tiffany and Ethan tried to challenge my decisions, I was ready. I had no intention of letting them walk all over me again, and I wouldn't allow them to manipulate me into giving them anything more. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. They had tried to control me for far too long, and now it was my turn. It was time to set boundaries, time to make it clear that I would no longer be at their mercy. By the time I finished going through the documents, it was late. The quiet of the motel room was almost oppressive, but I had a sense of purpose now. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't sure how Tiffany would react, but I wasn't going to back down. The next morning, I woke early and drove to the small diner in town. It was a place I had frequented when I first arrived here, a quiet spot where I could sit and think. It was familiar, comforting in a way. I ordered a coffee and sat at a corner booth, the morning sunlight filtering in through the windows. As I sipped my drink, my phone buzzed again. It was Tiffany. Dad, I don't know what to say, but I need you to understand that I'm sorry. I never meant for things to get so out of hand. Can we talk? I stared at the screen, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Part of me wanted to respond, wanted to hear her out, but another part of me knew better. She had already made her choice, and so had I. It was time to stop giving in to her manipulation. I put the phone down and looked out the window, the soft hum of the diner's quiet chatter around me. I wasn't going to respond to her right now. Not until I was ready to confront the situation head-on. But I knew the time was coming. The time to talk, to set the record straight, and to make them understand what their actions had cost me. I didn't want to fight, but I wasn't going to let them keep walking all over me either. I finished my coffee, paid the bill, and headed back to the motel. It was time to get serious. I needed to call Bob and get the final details in place. The legal steps, the paperwork. I was going to take control of this situation, and nothing would stop me. When I walked into the motel room, my phone rang. It was Bob. I had been expecting his call, but still, my heart skipped a beat. Clark, I've got the information you need. I've spoken to the lawyer, and we're ready to move forward. I sat down on the bed, listening closely as Bob explained everything. The pieces were falling into place. I could feel the weight of the situation, but it no longer felt overwhelming. I had control now. This was my life, and I was going to take it back. When we finished the call, I knew what I had to do next. It was time to set boundaries, not just for Tiffany and Ethan, but for myself. I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter who they were, take advantage of me again. The days seemed to stretch on endlessly as I waited for the inevitable confrontation. I had already made my decision, there was no turning back now. The paper trail had been laid, the legal steps taken, and the financial support I had once freely given had been severed. I had no intention of letting Tiffany and Ethan walk all over me again. The moment of reckoning was fast approaching, and I knew I had to be ready. My phone buzzed once again. It was a text from Tiffany, still trying to reach me. "Dad, please. I'm not sure what you think is going on, but we need to talk. I'm begging you." I stared at the words for a moment, feeling the familiar tug of guilt. Part of me wanted to answer. Part of me wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that I would forgive her, that we could work things out. But I had been there before. I had heard the same promises, the same apologies, and yet nothing ever changed. She never truly understood the toll it took on me, on my life, my time, my money. And that was the crux of it all. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for the illusion of family unity. I had to draw the line somewhere. I set the phone down and took a deep breath. The quiet of the motel room seemed almost oppressive, as if it were closing in on me. But there was no escaping the reality I had created. The decision had been made, and I had to stand firm. I wasn't the man I had been before. The one who kept giving without questioning, who kept putting others first until there was nothing left for himself. That man was gone. In his place was someone determined to protect himself and his future. That evening, I decided it was time to make my move. I would no longer hide from the situation or delay the confrontation. I was done being the quiet victim, done being the man who let his family walk all over him. I wasn't sure how Tiffany would react, but I knew this was the only way forward. I called Bob, who had been keeping me updated on everything. "Clark," Bob's voice came through the phone, steady and reassuring. "Everything is set. The papers are filed, and I've contacted the lawyer about the eviction notice. We're ready to move forward." "Good," I said, my voice tinged with determination. "I want this to be over. I want them to understand that this is my life, my house, and they don't get to control me anymore." There was a brief silence on the other end before Bob spoke again. "You've done the right thing, Clark. You can't keep letting them take advantage of you. I'm here for you, every step of the way." I thanked him, and as I hung up, a sense of calm washed over me. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment where I would finally reclaim my life and stop living under the shadow of my daughter's and son-in-law's expectations. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to the courthouse. It was time to file the official eviction notice. I had already made the decision, but seeing it in black and white, seeing the legal authority behind it, felt like a weight being lifted from my shoulders. It was one thing to feel like I had control, but it was another to make it official. The courthouse was quiet when I arrived, the smell of old wood and dust filling the air. I walked to the clerk's office and handed over the paperwork. The woman behind the counter took it without question, processing it quickly. "Mr. Miller," she said after reviewing the documents, "you understand that this is your daughter's residence?" "Yes," I replied. "But it's my property, and they've broken the agreement." The clerk nodded, stamping the papers with practiced precision. "The eviction notice will be served within the next 48 hours. If there are any issues, we can schedule a hearing, but you've taken the necessary steps." I thanked her, feeling a surge of relief mixed with something else, something I hadn't expected. A sense of finality. This chapter of my life was closing, and it was time to start a new one. As I left the courthouse, I felt the weight of the decision finally begin to settle in. I wasn't sure how Tiffany and Ethan would react, but I knew that this was the only path forward. I had no intention of going back. I didn't want to destroy my family, but I had to stop enabling their behavior. It wasn't healthy for any of us. And as much as it hurt to know that I might lose my daughter forever, I knew it was necessary. Later that day, I received a call from Detective Morrison. I had shared some of my concerns with him, and he had promised to keep an eye on things. "Clark, just wanted to let you know," Jim said. "I've been keeping tabs on Harry. He's been making rounds through town, talking to people, trying to spread a different version of events. It's not going to work, though. People know you, and they know the truth." His words brought me a small sense of comfort. It seemed that the small-town network was already working in my favor. "Thanks, Jim," I said, grateful for his support. "Let me know if anything else comes up." That evening, as I sat in the motel room, I received another message from Tiffany. "Dad, please. I just need you to listen. Can we meet?" I stared at the screen, feeling the conflict bubbling up inside me. Part of me wanted to meet with her, to hear her out, to believe that this time would be different. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. This wasn't just about a single argument or misunderstanding. This was about years of manipulation and entitlement. I set my phone down and looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the horizon. It was beautiful, but I couldn't let myself be distracted. The time for giving in was over. The time for standing my ground had arrived. I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. The days that followed were quiet but intense. I stayed in the motel, keeping to myself, carefully planning each step. The legal proceedings were moving forward, and while it wasn't easy, there was a strange comfort in knowing that I had done everything by the book. There was no room for doubt now. I continued to hear from Tiffany, though her messages grew more desperate. "Dad, please, I need you to understand. I'm trying to fix this." It was the same message, worded slightly differently each time, but always carrying the same sense of urgency. I wanted to respond, to offer some comfort, but I knew that if I did, I would only be pulling myself back into their web. I hadn't heard from Ethan, which didn't surprise me. He had always been more direct, more confrontational. I wasn't sure what his next move would be, but I didn't expect it to be one that involved reconciliation. I spent a lot of time thinking about the past, about everything I had done for them, everything I had given up. I remembered when Tiffany was younger, when she used to run to me with a hug, her small arms wrapping around my neck. The way she looked up to me, the way I had been her protector. Those memories felt like a distant dream now. It wasn't just the money, it was the manipulation. The constant pulling at my strings, making me feel like I owed them something. But I didn't owe them anything. I had already given enough. Late one afternoon, I received a call from Bob. His voice was steady, professional. "Clark, everything is set. I spoke to the lawyer today, and the eviction papers have been processed. They'll be served within the next 24 hours. You should be prepared for a reaction." I sat up straighter. How should I handle it? I don't want to escalate things, but I don't want to back down either. Bob sighed. "The lawyer is confident that you're in the right. This is a matter of your personal boundaries and protecting your assets. If they try to push back, it will only make their position weaker. But if you're worried, you can file for a temporary restraining order. That way, if they show up and try to cause trouble, you have legal protection." I appreciated his advice. "Thanks, Bob. I'll think about it. I'm not looking for a confrontation, but I also don't want to be caught off guard." "You've done everything by the book, Clark," he reassured me. "Now it's time to let the process play out. They'll either come to their senses, or they won't. Either way, it's no longer in your hands." I hung up feeling oddly calm. The fight wasn't over, but it felt like the hardest part was behind me. I had set my boundaries. I had taken control of the situation, and now it was time to let things unfold as they would. I wasn't going to beg for their understanding. If they wanted to fix things, they would have to come to me with real sincerity, not just more manipulation. The next morning, I got up early and made my way to the local diner for coffee. It had become a bit of a routine. The diner was busy, a mix of locals and tourists, but I preferred it that way. It was a place where no one knew me for who I had been before. It was just me, a man on his own, figuring out what the next chapter of his life would look like. I sat down at the counter and sipped my coffee, letting the warmth of it settle into my chest. As I was lost in my thoughts, the door to the diner opened, and in walked Tiffany. She spotted me almost immediately, her face drawn with exhaustion. It was the first time I had seen her in person since I left. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by something fragile, something desperate. I knew this was it, the confrontation I had been avoiding. She walked slowly toward me, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Dad," she said softly, her voice almost cracking. "Can we talk?" I took a long breath, setting my coffee cup down. "I'm not sure what you have to say, Tiffany, but we can talk." She sat down across from me, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked tired, not just physically, but emotionally worn out. It wasn't the look of someone who had been trying to manipulate me. It was the look of someone who had finally realized that their actions had consequences. "I'm sorry," she started, her voice shaking slightly. "I know I've messed up. I should have never treated you the way I did. I thought that because you always gave us everything, you'd always be there to fix things, but I was wrong." I didn't say anything. I just listened, the weight of her words settling into me like stones. "Ethan and we never meant to hurt you," she continued, her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I was doing what was best for our family, but I see now that I wasn't. I see how much you sacrificed, how much you gave, and I didn't appreciate it. And I'm sorry for that." Her apology hung in the air like a fragile thread, as if it could break at any moment. But I had learned long ago that apologies without change meant nothing. "You can't undo what's been done," I said softly. "You can't take back all the years of taking advantage of me, of pretending like I owed you something. I gave you everything I had, and it still wasn't enough." She bit her lip, her hands trembling. I know I can't undo it, but I want to change. I want to do better. I want to rebuild our relationship, even if it takes time." I looked at her for a long moment, my heart torn between the father who still loved her and the man who had finally realized that love shouldn't come at the cost of his own dignity. "I need time, Tiffany. Time to see if you really understand what you did. Time to see if you can change, if you can really respect me as a person and not just as a source of money. If you can't, then I'm afraid there's nothing left for us to salvage." Her face crumpled, and she nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will do whatever it takes, Dad," she whispered, her voice full of sincerity. "I'll prove it to you. I will." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle into me. It wasn't an easy decision, and I wasn't ready to fully forgive her yet, but at least this conversation felt different. She wasn't asking for anything more. She was just asking for a chance. "I hope you mean that, Tiffany," I said, my voice steady. "I really do." And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The days following my conversation with Tiffany were a blur. I had agreed to give her a chance, though I was still cautious. She had shown vulnerability, something I hadn't seen from her in years, but I knew better than to rush into forgiveness. It was going to take more than words to rebuild trust, it would take actions, and that was something I hadn't seen from her in a long time. I didn't hear from her again for a couple of days, and honestly, I was relieved. I didn't want to feel like I was being pressured or manipulated again. I needed space. I needed time to think, to reflect on what had happened, and to figure out what came next for me. I spent most of my time at the diner, the only place that seemed to offer any semblance of peace. The staff had gotten used to seeing me there, sitting alone in the corner, nursing my coffee and quietly observing the world. It became my refuge, the place where I could clear my head and make sense of everything. One afternoon, as I sat in my usual booth, I noticed a familiar face walk through the door. It was Bob. He spotted me right away, his eyes lighting up in recognition as he made his way over. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, already pulling out a chair and sitting down across from me before I could answer. "Of course," I said, nodding. "What's going on?" Bob leaned in, his voice dropping slightly. "I've been hearing things, Clark. Word's gotten out about what's been going on with Tiffany and Ethan. People around town are talking. I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I figured that would happen eventually. It's not all bad, Bob said, offering a reassuring smile. In fact, most people are on your side. They've seen how much you've done for them, and they're not blind to what's been going on. A lot of people are surprised by how much you've given, and how little appreciation you've gotten in return. I looked down at my coffee, feeling the truth of his words sink in. It was true. For so long, I had kept my sacrifices to myself, letting Tiffany and Ethan believe they were entitled to everything I gave them. I had always tried to protect them from the consequences of their actions, and in doing so, I had enabled their behavior. Now the town knew. They had seen the truth. Thanks for letting me know, I said quietly. I didn't want to make a spectacle of it, but I guess that was inevitable. Bob smiled. It's not a spectacle, Clark. It's a story of someone who finally decided to stand up for himself. You've been the one supporting them for years, but now it's time for you to take care of yourself. You've earned it. I nodded, grateful for his perspective. It was hard to admit, but he was right. I had spent my whole life taking care of others, my family, my career, everyone except myself. But now, for the first time in a long time, I was putting myself first. And it felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. We talked for a while longer, Bob offering advice and reassurance, as he always did. When the conversation finally wound down, I stood up, feeling a sense of determination settle over me. I appreciate it, Bob. I really do. It's good to know that I've got people in my corner. You've always had people in your corner, Clark, he said with a grin. You just needed to see it for yourself. As I left the diner, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the small town. I paused for a moment, taking it all in. It was a beautiful evening, but more than that, it felt like the beginning of something new. I wasn't sure where the road ahead would take me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. That night, as I sat in my motel room, I thought back to the conversation with Tiffany. It had been hard to listen to her, to hear her remorse and her promises. But I wasn't going to let her back into my life just yet. I had to see if she truly understood the gravity of what had happened, and if she was willing to change. She had taken the first step, but the road ahead was long. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The eviction papers had been processed, and everything was moving forward. It was a strange feeling, finalizing something that had been hanging over me for so long. But it also felt freeing. I was no longer shackled by the past, by the expectations of others. I made my way to the courthouse later that morning, ready to make things official. The clerk greeted me with a professional nod as I handed over the final documents. The process was quick, and by the time I left, everything had been set in motion. The real test would come when Tiffany and Ethan received the papers. I wasn't sure how they would react, but I knew one thing for sure: they would have to face the consequences of their actions. They could no longer count on me to bail them out. They would have to figure things out on their own. When I returned to the motel, my phone rang. It was Tiffany. I hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. "Dad," she said, her voice hesitant. "I got the papers. I don't know what to say. I know I messed up, but this feels like it's over." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not over, Tiffany. But it's time for you to understand something. This isn't about money. It's about respect. I spent years giving, and now I'm taking care of myself. If you want a relationship, it has to be based on respect, not expectations." She was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I understand. And I'll do whatever it takes to show you that I mean it. I want to fix this." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "It's going to take time, Tiffany. But you're on the right track. Just don't make any more promises you can't keep." She sighed, a sound of genuine frustration mixed with relief. "I won't, Dad. I promise." As we ended the call, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. I wasn't sure what the future held for me and Tiffany, but I knew that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying the weight of guilt on my shoulders. I had taken control of my own life. And no matter what happened next, I was ready. The weeks following my conversation with Tiffany were filled with quiet tension, the kind that settled over everything like a heavy fog. I wasn't sure where this new path would lead, but I knew one thing for sure: it was no longer just about the money, the house, or even the years of sacrifice. It was about honesty, about rebuilding a relationship with my daughter that was based on respect instead of obligation. And as much as it hurt, it was about making them understand that I wouldn't be the same old Clark anymore, the one who just gave and gave, expecting nothing in return. That man was gone. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. I hadn't heard much from Tiffany after that last call, and for a time, that was fine. I needed space to breathe, to re-establish my own boundaries. There was no need for constant contact or pressure. I needed to see whether she was going to take responsibility for her actions, not just apologize for them. It was a few weeks later when I finally got the call I had been expecting. I was sitting at my usual corner booth at the diner when my phone buzzed. It was Tiffany. I hesitated for a moment, but this time, I didn't let the call go to voicemail. "Dad," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been thinking about everything. And I need to tell you the truth. Not just about the money or the house, but about everything. I've been lying to myself for so long about why I did what I did, and I can't do it anymore." I took a deep breath. "What are you talking about?" She sighed, her voice wavering. "I've been using you, Dad. All these years. I didn't realize it until recently, but I was selfish. I thought you'd always be there to fix everything, and when you didn't, I just pushed you away. I blamed you, blamed everything for my problems, but the truth is, I wasn't ready to face what I was doing. Ethan and we weren't living the life we should have been, but I kept pretending everything was fine. And I used you to make it better. I used you to make my life easier." Her words stung, but they weren't a surprise. I had known the truth for a long time, I just hadn't wanted to admit it. "So, what do you expect from me now, Tiffany? More apologies? More promises?" "No," she said quickly, her voice tight. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for you to know that I see it now. I see everything I did. I can't change the past, but I want to make it right. I need to make it right." I remained silent, processing her words. It was a lot to take in, and part of me wanted to just close the door on this chapter of my life, walk away, and never look back. But another part of me, the part that still cared, the part that was still her father, wanted to hear her out. "I've done a lot of thinking, too," I said finally, my voice steady. "I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I needed to make you understand something. I'm not a bottomless pit. I'm not just here to fix your mistakes or fund your lifestyle. I've done enough of that." "I get it, Dad," she replied, her voice softer now. "I've been selfish. I'm not asking for you to fix me, or fix everything. I'm asking for you to let me fix myself. I want to show you that I can do better." I leaned back in the booth, the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't an easy thing to hear, but it was the truth. It was the first time in years that I had heard her speak with such honesty. I didn't know if she could change, if she could truly rebuild the trust that had been broken, but I wasn't going to shut her out completely. "Not yet." "All right," I said finally. "But this isn't just about what you say. It's about what you do from here on out. I'm not going to sit around waiting for you to change, and I'm not going to give you my money just because you say you're sorry. I understand, Dad. I don't want anything from you but your trust. And I'll work for it. I promise." The call ended, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. It wasn't an easy decision, but I had to let her try. I couldn't continue living like I had been, locked in a cycle of manipulation and resentment. If she wanted to rebuild our relationship, she would have to prove it. And if she didn't, then at least I would have done what I could. A few weeks later, things started to settle into a new rhythm. Tiffany called a few times, but the conversations were different. She wasn't asking for anything, no money, no favors, no rescue. She was talking about real things, her job, her life, and how she was working on herself. I didn't know if she was sincere, but there was a shift. I was seeing the first signs of someone who was finally taking responsibility for their actions. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. One afternoon, I was sitting in the diner again when I saw a familiar face walk through the door, Ethan. My stomach tightened, and I immediately braced for whatever confrontation might come. But he didn't walk up to me. Instead, he sat at a table across the room, glancing over at me before quickly looking away. It was clear he wasn't sure how to approach me. After a few minutes, he stood up and walked over. "Clark," he said, his voice flat. "Can we talk?" I raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Ethan had always been more direct than Tiffany, but there was something different about him now. He seemed more unsure of himself, almost apologetic. "I don't know if this will help," he started, "but I need to say that I'm sorry. For everything. I wasn't fair to you. I've been trying to fix things with Tiffany, and I've realized that I haven't treated you right either." I didn't respond immediately. I had heard these words before, but this time, something about them felt different. I took a long breath, letting his words sink in. "Okay," I said finally. "I'm willing to hear you out, Ethan. But I don't know where we go from here. Actions speak louder than words." He nodded, understanding the weight of my words. "I get it. I'm going to show you that I mean it. I'll prove it, I swear." And just like that, the door to reconciliation opened slightly. I wasn't ready to forgive him completely, not yet. But I was willing to see where this new chapter could lead. The weeks following that conversation with Ethan were quiet but significant. It wasn't that everything was suddenly perfect, it wasn't. The wounds from years of manipulation, disappointment, and betrayal ran deep, but there was a shift in the air. Things were changing, slowly but surely, and for the first time in a long time, I was allowing myself to believe that change was possible. Ethan kept his word. He made an effort, though it wasn't always easy for him. I saw him at the diner a couple of times, and each time, he was a little different, more respectful, more grounded. He didn't apologize endlessly, which I appreciated. Instead, he showed through his actions that he was committed to making things right. Tiffany, too, kept her promises. I heard from her more often, but the conversations were less about her needs and more about her progress. She talked about her therapy sessions, about the steps she was taking to fix the mess she had made of her life. It wasn't an easy road for her, but for the first time, I saw her taking responsibility. Not just for the mistakes she had made, but for the way she had treated me. One morning, I sat on the porch of my cabin, watching the mist rise off the lake as the sun slowly crept over the horizon. It was peaceful here, a world away from the turmoil of the past. This place had become my sanctuary. The small, modest cabin that I had bought with the money I had saved for years, money that had never gone to anyone but me for once. I had learned so much over the past few months. I had learned that family, no matter how much you love them, doesn't always know how to love you back the right way. But I had also learned that I couldn't keep giving, couldn't keep allowing myself to be used. I had to take care of myself, too. And I had to know that, even if I never got back the family I once dreamed of, I could still build a life that was mine, one filled with dignity, respect, and most importantly, peace. I was snapped out of my thoughts by the sound of a car approaching. I looked up just in time to see Tiffany's car pull into the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. She hadn't visited since our last conversation, and I wasn't sure what to expect. She stepped out of the car, looking different somehow. More confident, maybe, or just more aware of herself. She walked toward me slowly, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice steady, but there was a quiet vulnerability in her eyes. "I just wanted to thank you for giving me a chance." I stood up and smiled, feeling something inside me shift. "I didn't do it for you, Tiffany. I did it for me. I needed to stop living for everyone else." Her eyes welled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "I know, Dad. And I'm not asking you to forgive me just yet. I know I have a lot to prove, but I want to. I'm trying to be a better person. I nodded, taking a deep breath. I've heard that before. But this time, I believe you. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. No more words needed to be said. I had given her a chance, and now it was up to her to make the most of it. And maybe, just maybe, we could build something new, something real. I'm proud of you, I said quietly. She smiled, a genuine smile, not the practiced one I had grown used to. Thank you, Dad. That means more than you know. The next few months passed quietly, with small steps forward. Ethan kept his word, staying out of trouble and making an effort to build a life that didn't rely on me. Tiffany, too, kept moving forward. Her relationship with Ethan was still a work in progress, but she was no longer using me as a crutch. I saw her grow into someone who was learning to stand on her own, someone who could make her own decisions without depending on others to fix everything. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Tiffany. She had written me a letter, something I never thought would happen. It was a simple letter, nothing grand or dramatic, but it was real. She thanked me for everything I had done for her over the years, but she also apologized, for taking so much, for demanding so much, and for not seeing how hard it had been on me. She promised that things would be different from now on. I smiled as I read her words, feeling the last of the old resentment slip away. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. A few months later, we sat together at the diner for the first time in a long while. Tiffany and Ethan were there, sitting across from me. The atmosphere was different. There was no tension, no guilt, just a quiet understanding. We talked about everything and nothing. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like we were finally finding our way back to each other. The sun was setting outside, casting a soft, golden light across the restaurant, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but I knew now that I could face it with my head held high, knowing I had reclaimed my life and my dignity. I had learned the hard way that love and sacrifice don't always come without consequences. But I had also learned that, in the end, standing up for yourself doesn't mean you stop loving. It just means you start loving yourself, too. And that was enough.